An Air Force veteran died and came back, but what he saw on the other side, it wasn't all pearly gates and sunshine. He returned with a chilling message, a warning that left him rattled to his core. What did he see in heaven that made him question everything? And why does he say we need to hear this right now?
Imagine you're floating above your own body, a doctor frantically working below. But you feel no fear, only a serene detachment. You're drawn towards a tunnel of pulsating light, a warmth spreading through you, and feelings of peace and love unlike anything you've ever known enveloping you. Sounds like a fantasy, right? Yet for those who have had near-death experiences, this is reality. They've returned with stories that are both breathtaking and baffling, offering a glimpse into what awaits us beyond the veil. But it's not always a journey towards the light. Some near-death experiences paint a terrifying picture, a stark contrast to the blissful serenity often described. Imagine finding yourself in a desolate wasteland, fire and brimstone all around, tormented by grotesque figures and an overwhelming sense of despair. These chilling accounts of hellish realms, often described in excruciating detail, leave a lasting impact on those who experience them, forever altering their perspective on life and death. Makes you wonder, doesn't it, about the true nature of the afterlife and what awaits us when our time comes? These experiences, often occurring during moments of intense physical trauma when the body is on the brink of death, defy easy scientific explanation. While some researchers attribute them to oxygen deprivation, the release of endorphins, or neurological anomalies, many people who have had near-death experiences argue that the clarity and vividness of their experiences transcend any earthly explanation. They return with knowledge they couldn't have possibly known, like details of conversations happening in distant rooms while they were clinically dead, or with a newfound sense of purpose and spiritual awakening. Could these experiences be a window into a reality that exists beyond our five senses, a dimension that science has yet to fully grasp? And then there are those who claim to have met Jesus himself, not in some distant, ethereal realm after death, but right here in the midst of their lives. In moments of crisis or profound introspection, they speak of encounters filled with unconditional love, forgiveness, and a profound sense of connection to something greater than themselves. A gentle touch, a reassuring voice, a feeling of overwhelming peace. These are the hallmarks of their experiences. These encounters, often leading to radical life transformations, leave an indelible mark on their souls, inspiring them to live with greater compassion, purpose, and love. Of course, science, with its emphasis on empirical evidence and the material world, often struggles to reconcile these seemingly supernatural events. But perhaps, just perhaps, there are dimensions of reality that science has yet to grasp, forces at play that we are only beginning to understand. After all, throughout history, scientific understanding has constantly evolved, pushing the boundaries of what was once considered possible. From the discovery of electricity to the exploration of quantum physics, we have repeatedly expanded our understanding of the universe. Could the existence of God, the afterlife, and the reality of spiritual encounters be the next frontier of scientific exploration? These stories, whether of heavenly realms, terrifying encounters with the unknown, or face-to-face meetings with Jesus, challenge our conventional understanding of life and death. They force us to confront the big questions that have plagued humanity for centuries. What happens when we die? Is there a heaven and a hell? Is there a divine plan? Is there something more to our existence than this physical world? While definitive answers may remain elusive, one thing is certain. The accounts of those who claim to have touched the divine, to have peered beyond the veil, leave us with a sense of wonder and possibility. They remind us that there may be more to this reality than meets the eye, that the human spirit may be capable of experiencing the extraordinary, and that the mysteries of the universe are far from being fully unraveled. Perhaps, within these extraordinary tales, lies a deeper truth, a glimpse into the infinite potential of human consciousness and the boundless mysteries of the cosmos. One such extraordinary encounter happened to Chase Deo, an ordinary man living an ordinary life, who found himself swept into the radiant embrace of heaven. He returned not only with memories of unspeakable beauty and intense peace, but also with urgent messages from Jesus himself, messages of love, forgiveness, and a call to deepen our connection with the divine. Could Chase's experience be a call for all of us to awaken to the divine possibilities that surround us? Chase Dio, an Air Force veteran, had always been a man of the here and now. His life was a testament to the tangible, the crispness of his uniform, the roar of a jet engine, the weight of a loaded weapon. He found comfort in discipline, in the predictability of routine, in the solid reality of his existence. Spiritual musings about the afterlife, about heaven and hell and the great beyond, were for others, for those with the inclination to ponder such abstract concepts. Chase, with his feet firmly planted on the ground, dedicated his life to serving his country and maintaining a sense of unwavering control. But on one fateful day, that sense of control, that grounded reality he clung to, shattered into a million pieces. The day began like any other. He woke before dawn, the insistent chirping of his alarm clock pulling him from sleep. The aroma of strong black coffee filled his small kitchen, the familiar scent grounding him in the familiar. His morning run was a ritual, a way to clear his head and prepare for the day ahead. The rhythmic pounding of his feet on the pavement, the crisp morning air filling his lungs, the steady beat of his heart. It all reinforced the sense that all was right with his world. But as the morning wore on, a subtle unease began to creep in, a disquiet he couldn't quite place. It started as a faint pressure in his chest, a fleeting dizziness that he dismissed as fatigue. After all, he was a man who prided himself on his physical and mental resilience, a man trained to push through discomfort, to overcome any obstacle. He'd endured grueling training exercises, faced danger head-on in the line of duty, and always emerged stronger. This, he told himself, was nothing. Yet, the feeling persisted. The pressure in his chest intensified, a vice tightening around his lungs, making it difficult to breathe. The dizziness worsened, the world around him tilting and swaying as if he were on a ship, caught in a storm. He tried to shake it off, to attribute it to dehydration or lack of sleep, but a growing sense of dread gnawed at him. This was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Later that day, as Chase sat in his quiet living room, the pressure in his chest became unbearable. He tried to stand, to move, to do anything to alleviate the suffocating sensation, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. The room spun violently, the familiar furniture distorting into grotesque shapes. He reached out to steady himself, but his hand met only air. Then, the world went black. Not the gentle fade of sleep, but a sudden absolute darkness that swallowed him whole. The last thing he registered was a silence so profound it was deafening, as if the entire universe had held its breath. And then, he was floating. He was above his body, looking down at himself sprawled on the floor, lifeless and still. He saw the faint rise and fall of his chest cease, the color drain from his face, the light fade from his eyes. It was like watching a movie, a surreal and horrifying spectacle in which he was both the audience and the star. He tried to scream, to cry out, to somehow reconnect with his body, but no sound emerged from his lips. He reached out to touch himself, but his hand passed through his arm as if it were made of smoke. Panic, raw and primal, flooded him. This was not the peaceful passing he'd always imagined. This was something else entirely, something that defied logic and reason, something that shattered his carefully constructed worldview. Time, as he knew it, ceased to exist. He was suspended in a timeless void, his consciousness detached from his physical form, adrift in a sea of nothingness. He was aware, acutely aware, but his senses were heightened, distorted. He noticed details he'd never seen before, the intricate patterns in the wood grain of his coffee table, the dust motes dancing in the faint stream of sunlight filtering through the window, the tiny imperfections in the paint on the wall. Then, a force, immense and unrelenting, seized him. It wasn't a gentle tug, but a violent wrenching, pulling him away from the familiar surroundings of his home, away from his lifeless body, into a darkness so profound it defied description. He tried to resist, to fight against the unseen force that was dragging him into the abyss, but it was like trying to swim against a tsunami. The harder he struggled, the stronger the current became. Fear, unlike any he'd ever known, gripped him. This was not the fear of a soldier facing enemy fire, not the fear of a man confronting a physical threat. This was a fear that went beyond the physical, a fear that resonated in the depths of his soul. He was being pulled towards something vast and unknowable, something that filled him with a sense of dread he couldn't comprehend. He tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. He hadn't been a religious man, his faith more a matter of tradition than conviction. Now, facing the ultimate unknown, he felt a profound sense of regret. He wished he'd paid more attention to the sermons his mother used to drag him to as a child, wished he'd explored the spiritual side of life he'd always dismissed as irrelevant. As he was dragged deeper into the darkness, he began to hear sounds. At first, they were faint, distant, like the cries of lost souls carried on the wind. But as he descended further, the sounds grew louder, more distinct, more horrifying. They were the sounds of suffering, of unimaginable pain and despair. He heard screams, moans, wails of anguish that seemed to tear at his very essence. Then, they emerged. Grim shapes began to appear in the darkness, grotesque figures with twisted limbs and contorted faces. Their eyes glowed with an eerie light. Their mouths gaped in silent screams. They were creatures of nightmare, beings that defied description, their forms shifting and changing, their movements jerky and unnatural. They reached for him with clawed hands, their touch sending icy shivers down his spine. He tried to recoil, to shield himself from their grasp, but there was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. He was trapped in this infernal realm, surrounded by these terrifying creatures. They closed in on him, their faces inches from his, their breath hot and fetid. He could feel their hunger, their desperation, their insatiable need to feed on his fear. One of them reached out and touched his face, its icy fingers leaving a trail of burning cold. He recoiled, but another creature grabbed his arm, its grip like iron. They pulled him closer, their claws tearing at his clothes, their faces contorting in grotesque expressions of hunger. He felt himself being pulled apart, his essence dissolving into the darkness. In that moment, as he was consumed by the abyss, Chase experienced a profound sense of regret. He regretted the life he hadn't lived, the chances he hadn't taken, the love he hadn't expressed. He regretted his arrogance, his dismissal of the spiritual, his unwavering belief in the tangible. Is this it? He thought, as the darkness swallowed him whole. Is this the end? Chase drifted in an ocean of absolute darkness, an endless, suffocating black abyss stretching on forever, swallowing him whole. The air was heavy, thick with a palpable sense of evil that pressed down on him, stealing his breath and his bravery. It felt like a physical weight on his chest, a suffocating blanket of dread that made each gasp a struggle, each heartbeat a painful reminder of his utter isolation. He was trapped, not by tangible ropes or chains, but by the overwhelming feeling that there was no way out, no escape from this horrifying, desolate place. There was no ground beneath him, no sense of up or down, no point of reference in this disorienting void, just the terrifying feeling of being utterly lost. What unimaginable horrors could possibly lurk in such a place, where even the darkness itself seemed to pulse with a malevolent life of its own? But the darkness was more than just the absence of light. It was alive, pulsing with a hidden, malevolent energy that whispered to him with 1,000 unseen voices. These voices chittered and mocked. their insidious whispers weaving promises of pain and despair, their tones dripping with malice. He felt eyes on him before he saw anything, a creeping sensation of being watched, hunted by unseen things lurking just beyond the reach of his senses. Things that slithered and writhed in the shadows, their forms obscured by the impenetrable abyss. A soft rustling sound, like dry leaves skittering across the ground, grew louder and louder, a terrifying crescendo, a warning of the horrors to come, a prelude to his inevitable doom. What were these unseen entities, these whispers in the dark, and what did they want with Chase? What dark purpose did they serve in this desolate realm? Twisted and monstrous, they crawled towards him out of the suffocating void, their forms slowly emerging from the shadows like nightmares given gruesome life. They were vaguely humanoid, but broken and wrong, their bodies twisted and contorted by some unseen force into horrifying parodies of men. Their arms and legs bent at unnatural angles, their flesh a grotesque tapestry of gaping wounds that oozed a sickly viscous fluid. Rotting flesh hung in tattered shreds, pieces of them falling off as they moved, disappearing into the void only to reappear moments later, as if the void itself was toying with him, reveling in his terror. Their very existence seemed to defy the laws of nature, a grotesque mockery of life itself. Their voices, a cacophony of growls and screams, animalistic and filled with unimaginable pain, shattered the oppressive silence. A chilling, mocking laughter echoed through the void, a sound that seemed to dig into Chase's very soul, amplifying his fear, a constant reminder of his helplessness. He couldn't look away, his eyes fixed on their horrifying forms, as if some unseen force compelled him to watch, forcing him to bear witness to their gruesome existence. Each ragged breath he took felt like a betrayal, a concession to the horrors that surrounded him. As they drew closer, he could see their faces, or what remained of them. Empty sockets glowed with an eerie, unnatural light, like dying embers in the vast darkness, reflecting the endless pain and hunger that consumed them. Their mouths hung open in silent screams, revealing rows of jagged teeth and rotting gums, a horrifying mockery of human expression. Some of them had faces that were half gone, features ripped away, leaving only a horrifying emptiness where their eyes and mouths should have been. A deep, primal fear, unlike anything he had ever felt before, gripped Chase. A terror that clawed at his throat, constricting his airway and threatening to consume him entirely. These weren't just monsters, they were suffering itself given form, the embodiment of pain and despair given grotesque life. One of the creatures reached for him, its bony hand impossibly long, fingers twitching and curling like snakes, reaching out to ensnare him in its skeletal grasp. Chase flinched, desperate to evade that touch, but there was nowhere to go. No escape in this endless expanse of shadow. The creature's touch sent a jolt of icy pain through him, a deep, agonizing ache that sapped his strength and his will to fight back, leaving him vulnerable and exposed. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him, the stench of decay and rot filling his nostrils, making him gag. More of them joined in, their claw-like hands tearing at him, pulling him deeper into the suffocating darkness, eager to claim him as their own. They didn't speak, but their intent was clear. They wanted to drag him down into their world of eternal suffering, to make him one of them, to share in their unending torment. Their screams grew louder, a chorus of pain and anguish that filled his mind, threatening to overwhelm him and shatter his sanity. He felt their icy touch seeping into his bones, chilling him to the core, draining the warmth from his body. Was there any way to fight back against these creatures, or was Chase doomed to succumb to their torment? Was there any escape from this abyss of despair, or would he be forever lost in this sea of suffering? As he struggled against their relentless assault, his life flashed before his eyes. Not the good memories, the happy times, but a harsh, unforgiving replay of every selfish thing he had ever done, every mean word he had ever spoken, every opportunity to show kindness that he had squandered. He relived each moment with painful clarity, the weight of his regrets crushing him, a suffocating burden that threatened to drown him in remorse. The creatures seemed to feed on his despair, growing stronger and more relentless with each passing moment, their power fueled by his fear and self-loathing. Each regret, each missed opportunity played out before him like a cruel mockery of the life he could have lived. He fought back, driven by a primal instinct to survive. But it was a futile effort. His struggles were met with their cruel laughter, a mocking chorus that echoed through the void. "You can't escape," they seemed to say, their voices a symphony of malice and despair. "You're ours now." Their grip tightened, their claws tearing at his very being, threatening to rip him apart and scatter his essence across the endless expanse of darkness. He felt his strength waning, his resolve crumbling under the weight of their relentless assault. He cried out, a desperate plea for help echoing through the void, a last gasp of defiance in the face of overwhelming despair. "Help me!" His voice sounded thin and reedy in the vast emptiness, a desperate whisper lost in the cacophony of screams and growls. His cry seemed to surprise them for a fleeting moment, causing a brief pause in their relentless assault. But then, their howls became even more ferocious, filled with an intensified rage and frustration. They were determined to break him completely, to snuff out any last ember of hope he had left and claim his soul for their own. Their fury was palpable, a tangible force that pressed down on him, threatening to crush him beneath its weight. Chase felt himself fading away, the oblivion closing in like a suffocating blanket, smothering his thoughts, dulling his senses, and stealing his awareness. This is it, he thought. The end. Regret washed over him in waves, not just for the bad things he had done, but for the life he hadn't truly lived, the love he hadn't given, the good he hadn't done. His soul cried out in anguish, a song of sadness for a life wasted, a life cut tragically short. The darkness crept in, consuming him, pulling him down into the abyss, where he would become one with the suffering, another lost soul in the endless sea of torment. Just as Chase was about to give in to the overwhelming despair, to let the suffocating darkness swallow him whole, a tiny spark of light appeared way off in the distance. It was a pinprick of hope in the vast, endless nothingness, a beacon of unexpected promise in the suffocating sea of despair. At first, Chase thought it was just his mind playing tricks on him, a cruel hallucination, a fleeting mirage in the desolate landscape of his despair. But the light grew stronger, steadily cutting through the oppressive darkness, like a radiant beam, a lifeline in the overwhelming sea of despair. The creatures, those horrifying parodies of men, recoiled from the encroaching light, as if it were acid burning their putrid flesh. Their triumphant screams of torment turned into panicked cries, their cruel confidence replaced by raw, visceral fear. They seemed to be inherently afraid of the light, shrinking back as it drew closer, as if its purity was anathema to their very existence. It was a light that offered hope, a light that promised salvation, a light that might just be powerful enough to save him from the clutches of the encroaching darkness. Chase felt the warmth of the light wash over him, a comforting warmth that chased away the cold, suffocating darkness that had held him captive for what felt like an eternity. It felt like sinking into a soothing hot bath after being stranded in a blizzard, a wave of relief washing over him, thawing the icy grip of despair that had settled deep within his bones. It was more than just light. It felt like a living presence, a powerful force of unconditional love that he couldn't begin to comprehend. It was like being enveloped in an embrace so pure and unconditional that it defied any experience he had ever known. For the first time since this terrifying nightmare began, he felt a glimmer of hope, a tiny spark igniting in the desolate landscape of his despair. The terrifying creatures retreated further, their twisted forms melting back into the shadows as the light enveloped him, as if they were repelled by its inherent purity, its unwavering goodness. What was this light, this beacon of hope piercing the oppressive darkness? Could it really offer salvation from the horrors that had plagued Chase? A lifeline in this sea of suffering? And what would it ask of him in return? Chase didn't know where this light came from, the origin of this miraculous salvation. But he knew one thing for sure. It had come for him. It had heard his desperate cries for help, his pleas echoing through the desolate void, and answered with unwavering compassion. As the light drew closer, the suffocating darkness around him started to recede, like a dense fog lifting at the break of dawn, and the heavy weight that had been pressing down on him, the weight of his fear and regret, seemed to just melt away. For the first time since he was plunged into this abyss, he could breathe easily again, his lungs filling with something that felt lighter and purer than air, something that invigorated his very soul. And even though he didn't understand what was happening, he knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that he was about to face something bigger, something more profound, something infinitely more significant than anything he had ever encountered before. The light grew closer, filling the emptiness that had surrounded Chase, pushing back the encroaching shadows and illuminating the vast void. It wasn't just a bright light. It was vibrantly alive, pulsing with warmth, power, and a love so deep and profound that it was nearly impossible to describe. It was like staring into the very heart of creation, the source of all that was good and pure in the universe, the origin of all love and compassion. Chase felt the crushing weight of his fear, regret, and despair lifting, as if the light was actively washing away the suffocating darkness, cleansing him of his burdens, absolving him of his past. He could feel it deep within him, a comforting presence that resonated with his very soul, a harmonious connection he had never known he was missing. As the light completely surrounded him, Chase felt a gentle pull, like a comforting whisper in his heart, drawing him towards the source of life itself. He let go, surrendering to the light, allowing himself to be carried by its gentle current, trusting in its inherent goodness. And in an instant, the horrifying void was replaced by something entirely different, something breathtakingly beautiful. The darkness vanished completely, like a heavy curtain being drawn back to reveal a breathtaking vista, and Chase found himself in a place that seemed to stretch on forever, filled with a radiant golden light that extended in every direction. The air, if you could call it that, was infused with an overwhelming sense of peace, love, and safety. It was like he had come home to a place he never knew existed, a place where he finally belonged, a place where he could finally find solace. Then he saw him. A figure emerged from the very heart of the light, walking towards Chase with an effortless grace. He immediately knew who it was, even though he couldn't explain how. It was Jesus. There was no mistaking it. The figure radiated an incredible power, a power that made Chase feel small and insignificant, like a single grain of sand on an endless beach. But this power was perfectly balanced with an equally incredible love, a love that calmed him and filled him with a sense of awe and wonder. Who was this figure radiating such power and love? What message did he have for Chase, and how would it change his understanding of life, death, and his place in the universe? Was this a final judgment, or something more profound, a chance for redemption and a new beginning? Jesus was clothed in the light itself, his features both perfectly clear and yet impossible to fully describe, as if they were beyond human understanding. It was like trying to remember a fleeting dream, the fading memory of a feeling that disappears when you wake up. Chase felt utterly unworthy to even look at him, yet he couldn't tear his gaze away. He wanted to fall to his knees, to prostrate himself before this being of pure light, to beg for forgiveness for all the wrongs he had done, for all the opportunities he had squandered. But before he could speak, before he could even form a coherent thought, Jesus spoke. His voice didn't come through Chase's ears, but resonated deep within him, clear and strong, like a bell tolling in the depths of his soul. It wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of eternity, the echo of a timeless presence. "Chase," Jesus said, his voice filled with both immense compassion and a profound seriousness that Chase could hardly bear. "You have come perilously close to the edge of forever." Tears welled up in Chase's eyes as the full weight of those words crashed over him. He knew, without needing any further explanation, that this wasn't just about him. It was about the choices he had made throughout his life, about the purpose he had been given and had ignored for so long, the potential he had carelessly squandered. Jesus' gaze seemed to pierce right through him, not with judgment, but with unwavering truth. It was impossible to hide anything in that radiant light. Every mistake, every failure, every hidden sin was exposed, laid bare before the one who already knew it all. "I gave you life," Jesus continued, his voice resonating with gentle understanding, "not for you to waste it on selfish pursuits, but to use it to help others, to uplift those in need, to spread love and compassion. You were made to love, to give, and to reflect the light I placed inside you. But instead, you allowed the distractions of the world to pull you away from what truly matters, from the divine purpose that lies within you." Chase desperately wanted to speak, to explain himself, to offer justifications and excuses, but he couldn't. Every excuse he had ever made seemed utterly silly and meaningless in the presence of this profound truth. He could only cry, the crushing weight of his choices pressing down on him like a tidal wave, threatening to drown him in a sea of regret. Yet even in his brokenness, even in his despair, Chase felt the light lifting him, holding him together when he felt like he would shatter into a million pieces. "Your life is a precious gift," Jesus said, his voice resonating with unwavering conviction. "And it has a unique and important purpose. But you have forgotten that purpose, lost sight of your true calling, like so many others who wander aimlessly through this world. The path you were on leads to destruction, not just for you, but for the world around you. Your choices have far-reaching consequences, and the darkness you embraced threatens to consume not only you, but all those you could have helped." Chase was completely overwhelmed. His mind raced with unanswered questions, 1,000 thoughts vying for his attention. But before he could even begin to process it all, Jesus raised his hand, and Chase's vision was instantly flooded with vivid scenes of chaos and destruction. He saw the world as it truly was, broken, divided, and consumed by the evils of greed, hatred, and indifference. Fires raged across the land, cities crumbled into dust, and people turned on each other with a terrifying savagery. The suffering was immense, and Chase could feel it as if it were his own, the pain and despair of the world echoing in his very soul. "This is the path humanity is on," Jesus said, his voice filled with profound sadness. "A path of self-destruction, a descent into darkness. But it doesn't have to be this way. There's still time to change course, to choose a different path, to embrace the light." Could Chase possibly bear the weight of this revelation, the knowledge of humanity's impending doom? What role did Jesus intend for him to play in this cosmic struggle between light and darkness? Was he meant to be a savior, a prophet, or simply a witness to the unfolding tragedy? Chase felt a flicker of hope ignite within him at those words, a lifeline in the overwhelming sea of despair. But the visions didn't stop. He saw terrifying glimpses of future disasters, events that shook him to his very core, Explosions rocked the world, wars ravaged nations, and unimaginable destruction filled his mind. A horrifying montage of human suffering and despair. Entire countries collapsed under the weight of their own darkness, and the cries of the suffering echoed in his soul. A symphony of pain and loss that threatened to overwhelm him. He desperately wanted to look away, to shield himself from the horrors, but he couldn't. The scenes were burned into his memory, not as a form of punishment, but as a dire warning. A chilling glimpse into the abyss that awaited humanity if they continued down their current path. "Do you see now?" Jesus asked, his voice resonating with a power that transcended mere words. "Do you finally understand why your time is not yet over? Why you have been given this glimpse into the heart of darkness?" Chase blinked back tears, the radiant figure of Jesus shimmering through the blur. Everything Jesus had said, the sheer weight of his words, the profound implications of his message, pressed down on him like a physical force. He understood the urgency, the terrifying, desperate need to act, but fear coiled in his gut like a venomous serpent. How could he, one ordinary guy, possibly make a difference against such overwhelming darkness? It felt like trying to hold back a tsunami with a broom, a futile effort against an unstoppable force. Jesus, with an all-encompassing understanding that seemed to reach into the deepest corners of Chase's soul, gently dispelled the horrifying vision. The infinite light surrounding them blazed even brighter, its warmth washing over Chase in soothing waves, chasing away the fear that threatened to consume him, to paralyze him with inaction. It was a warmth that seeped deep into his bones, a profound feeling of belonging and unconditional love that he had never experienced before. "You're not alone in this, Chase," Jesus assured him, his voice a calming presence in the swirling chaos of Chase's emotions, a beacon of hope in the storm of his doubts. "The light is always with you, guiding you, empowering you. It's been there since the day you were born, a spark of divinity residing within you, waiting to be ignited. But you have to choose it, Chase. You have to consciously choose to embrace it, to let it guide you, let it shine through you, and be a beacon of light for others who are stumbling in the darkness." His words resonated deep within Chase, not as a crushing burden, but as a powerful calling, a divine purpose he was destined to fulfill. A wave of doubt washed over him, threatening to extinguish the fledgling flame of his resolve. He felt so utterly ordinary, so insignificant in the face of such a monumental task. How could he possibly do this? How could he possibly rise to the occasion and fulfill this sacred duty? But beneath the gnawing doubt, a flicker of determination started to grow, nurtured by the unwavering faith he saw reflected in Jesus' compassionate eyes. Jesus wasn't just giving him an impossible task. He was giving him the strength to carry it out, the courage to face the challenges ahead. Could Chase find it within himself to overcome his doubts and embrace this newfound purpose? "It won't be easy," Jesus warned, his expression growing serious, his gaze filled with a knowing solemnity. "The world won't exactly welcome the truth you have to share. They will resist, they will scoff, they will try to silence you. There will be those who actively fight against the light, who cling to the darkness, who revel in the shadows. But you have to speak, Chase. You have to find your voice and speak the truth, no matter how difficult it may be, no matter the opposition you face. Some will listen, their hearts open and ready to receive the light, and through them, the light will spread, exponentially multiplying its reach and gradually drive back the encroaching shadows." Before Chase could even begin to formulate a response, overwhelmed by the enormity of the task before him, Jesus stepped closer. He placed a comforting hand on Chase's shoulder, and even though it wasn't a physical touch, Chase felt it deep within him, a profound connection that transcended the physical realm. It was a transfer of strength, of unwavering purpose, of an unshakable peace that settled over him like a warm, comforting blanket. "Time is short, Chase," Jesus said, his voice filled with an urgency that resonated in Chase's very core, a sense of impending peril. that spurred him to action. Don't waste a single precious moment. The world desperately needs you, your voice, your courage, your light. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the radiant light began to fade. Chase desperately wanted to stay, to cling to this overwhelming feeling of unconditional love and profound peace. But he knew, deep down, that he couldn't. His purpose, his newfound mission, lay back in the world he had almost left behind, the world teetering on the brink of destruction. As the light gradually dimmed, Chase felt himself being inexorably pulled back towards the encroaching darkness, back to the life he had nearly lost. The last thing he heard before everything faded to black was Jesus' voice, echoing in the depths of his soul. Remember what you've seen, Chase. Remember the truth you have witnessed. Hold on to it with unwavering conviction. Share it with courage and compassion, and never forget, even in the darkest of times, even when all hope seems lost, there is always hope. The light will always find a way. Chase gasped for air, his body convulsing violently as he was abruptly ripped back into consciousness. The sterile fluorescent lights of the hospital room were blinding, and for a disorienting moment, he was completely lost, adrift in a sea of confusion. Every muscle in his body ached, and his chest felt heavy, a lingering reminder of the immense pressure he had felt in the suffocating darkness. Nurses and doctors rushed to his side, their faces a mixture of shock and immense relief. The machines beside his bed beeped erratically, announcing his unexpected return from the clutches of death. He had been dead. There was no doubt about it. For what felt like an eternity, lost in a horrifying abyss of despair. Yet here he was, heart pounding with renewed vigor, lungs burning with the effort of breathing, miraculously alive against all odds. But Chase knew, with unwavering certainty, that this wasn't just some inexplicable medical anomaly, a fluke of nature. He hadn't just touched death. He had been completely immersed in it, and had seen the terrifying reality that lay beyond the veil of life. The memory of his experience was vivid, raw, and permanently burned into his very being, an indelible mark on his soul. His first coherent thought wasn't one of relief, but the echo of Jesus' urgent voice in his mind. You have to tell them, Chase. Warn them, tell them the truth. It was a divine command, a desperate plea, a sacred mission that filled him with both overwhelming dread and a strange newfound sense of purpose. He had been shown the future, a terrifying glimpse of a world teetering on the brink of self-destruction, and he knew with absolute certainty that he had to do something, anything to prevent it. The next few hours were a blur of incessant medical questions and confused, disbelieving faces. Chase answered cautiously, carefully avoiding the full truth of his extraordinary experience. How could he possibly explain something so profoundly inexplicable, so utterly beyond their comprehension? He barely understood it himself, but he knew, with unwavering certainty, that it was undeniably real. As the adrenaline gradually wore off and exhaustion finally set in, Chase was left alone in the quiet sterility of the hospital room. The rhythmic beeping of the machines was a constant reminder of his fragile mortality, but his mind was anything but quiet. The visions Jesus had shown him played over and over in his head, like a nightmarish film on an endless loop. The unimaginable suffering, the unbridled chaos, the desperate cries of a suffering humanity. It was a bleak future he was now burdened to prevent. But how? Where would he even begin? And always, there was that urgent, echoing command in the back of his mind. Time is running out, Chase. Don't waste it. He was torn, caught in a relentless internal struggle. Part of him desperately wanted to forget everything, to bury the memories deep within his subconscious, to pretend it never happened. What could he, one seemingly ordinary man, possibly do to avert such a catastrophe? But another part of him, the part that had been irrevocably touched by the divine, the part that now resonated with the light, knew he couldn't ignore what he had seen and experienced. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about something far greater, something that transcended his own fears and doubts. The next morning, Chase was discharged from the hospital, released back into a world that now seemed both familiar and utterly alien. Friends and family came to see him, their faces etched with a mixture of worry and immense relief. They asked him what had happened, how he felt, and Chase gave them vague, evasive answers, hesitant to share the full truth of his experience. But Jesus' words echoed relentlessly in his mind, urging him to speak, to share his vision, to warn those he loved. Finally, when his closest friend pressed him for answers, Chase decided to try, to take a leap of faith, and share the burden that now weighed heavily on his soul. "I saw something," he began, his voice trembling with a mixture of apprehension and conviction. "Something I can't fully explain. Something that defies logic and reason. I wasn't just unconscious lying in a hospital bed. I was gone. My soul, my very essence, was transported to another realm. And there, in that realm of light and truth, I saw him. I saw Jesus." The room fell into an uneasy silence, the air thick with disbelief. His friend's expression shifted from genuine concern to bewildered confusion, then finally settled into a mask of incredulity. Chase pressed on, determined to share his experience, to convey the weight of what he had witnessed. He described the radiant light, the overwhelming presence of Jesus, the terrifying visions of the future that had been seared into his memory. He explained the urgent message, the dire warning, the seemingly impossible mission he had been given. His friend's response was immediate and dismissive, a knee-jerk reaction to the unbelievable. "You were clinically dead, Chase," he countered, his voice laced with skepticism. "Your brain was deprived of oxygen, and it was just playing tricks on you. It's a common phenomenon after experiencing such a traumatic event. Don't let it get to you. Don't let it consume you. It was just a hallucination, a figment of your imagination." The words stung, piercing Chase's newfound resolve like tiny daggers. But deep down, he understood his friend's reaction. If their roles were reversed, he might have reacted the same way, dismissing it as a byproduct of trauma, a desperate attempt by the mind to make sense of the inexplicable. But deep down, in the core of his being, Chase knew what he had experienced was undeniably real.
It wasn't a fleeting hallucination, a cruel trick of the mind, or a desperate grasp at delusion. It was an undeniable reality, a profound encounter with the divine, and nothing could change that. He had been touched by a power beyond comprehension, given a mission that transcended his own understanding, and he wouldn't let fear or doubt deter him. The world desperately needed to know the truth, to heed the warning, and he would find a way to tell them, no matter the cost. The weeks that followed Chase's dramatic return from the brink of death were a tumultuous roller coaster of emotions and experiences. He felt this constant, gnawing urge to tell his story, to share the profound vision he had witnessed, to convey the urgent message he had been given. But every time he tried to articulate his experience, to share the truth of what he had seen and heard, he was met with a frustrating brick wall of disbelief. Some people, he swore, were barely holding back their laughter, their faces contorted in barely concealed amusement. Others gave him that pitying look, the one that silently screamed, "Bless your heart, you've clearly been through a lot, and your mind is playing tricks on you." It stung, yes, it definitely stung, but it also lit a fire under him, fueling his determination to share his story. After all, Jesus had forewarned him about this very resistance, hadn't he? The world wouldn't exactly roll out the red carpet for the truth, especially a truth as extraordinary and unbelievable as his. But Chase wasn't one to back down from a challenge, especially not a challenge with such profound implications for the fate of humanity. He started talking more openly, more publicly, and that's when things took an interesting turn. While plenty of folks dismissed him as a delusional loon, there were a few, a small, curious, and open-minded bunch, who actually listened with rapt attention. They'd hang on his every word, their eyes wide with a captivating mix of fascination and something deeper, something that resonated with their own anxieties about the state of the world, their own yearning for meaning and purpose. Some even broke down, confessing their own deeply buried fears, their own struggles with faith and doubt. It was like a light bulb went off in Chase's mind, illuminating his path forward. His mission wasn't about convincing the skeptical masses. It was about finding those who were ready to hear the message, those whose hearts were already open to the possibility of something more, something beyond the mundane reality they inhabited. And with that empowering realization, he threw himself into his work with a renewed passion, a burning desire to fulfill his purpose. He spoke at small gatherings, wrote heartfelt letters, poured his heart out in online forums, and connected with others who had walked a similar path, those who had brushed with death and returned with a story to tell, a message to share. Slowly but surely, like ripples expanding outward from a single drop of water, his message began to spread, reaching those who were ready to listen. But those vivid visions, those terrifying glimpses of the future Jesus had shown him, they never truly left him. They lingered in the shadows of his mind, a constant, haunting reminder of the urgency of his mission. He knew now that it wasn't just about warning people about the impending darkness. It was about inspiring them to change, to actively embrace love, compassion, humility, and faith, the essential weapons they needed to combat the encroaching darkness he had witnessed. The task felt monumental, like trying to empty the vast ocean with a tiny teaspoon. There were days when the insidious tendrils of doubt crept in, whispering doubts in his ear, attempting to undermine his resolve. But Chase steadfastly held onto the light, that unwavering belief that had miraculously pulled him back from the brink of despair. And as he continued his tireless work, he started to see tiny sparks of hope ignite in the eyes of those he touched. Little signs that maybe, just maybe, he was making a difference, however small. Life, he realized, would never be the same. But he had made peace with that undeniable truth. This wasn't about going back to normal, to the mundane existence he had once known. It was about embracing the extraordinary purpose he had been given. And every step of the way, through every challenge and every triumph, those powerful words of Jesus echoed in his heart. Remember what you've seen. Remember the truth you have been shown. Remember the mission you have been given. And don't forget, even in the darkest of times, there is always hope.
He was back in the world, back in the familiar rhythm of life, but it was like seeing it all with new eyes, with a newfound clarity and appreciation. Everything felt hyper-real, intensely vivid and alive, yet strangely insignificant all at the same time. The vibrant colors of a breathtaking sunset, the carefree laughter of innocent children, even the mundane rhythm of traffic. It all held a new kind of preciousness, a poignant reminder of how quickly it could all vanish, how fragile life truly is. He couldn't shake the lingering memory of his near-death experience, the weight of the mission entrusted to him. The burning question was, how to effectively carry it out, how to translate his vision into action. First, the sheer enormity of the task threatened to crush him, to bury him under the weight of responsibility. Jesus' words were a constant, relentless drumbeat in his mind. Warn them, tell them the truth, time is running out. But how could he possibly convey his experience, his message, when most people looked at him like he had sprouted a second head, like he was utterly insane? He felt like Atlas, bearing the weight of the world on his weary shoulders, a burden too heavy to bear. And there were those dark, lonely nights when the insidious doubts would come, slithering into his thoughts like venomous snakes, poisoning his resolve. Had he truly experienced all that he remembered? Or was it just his oxygen-deprived brain playing cruel tricks on him, conjuring up a fantastical delusion to cope with the trauma of death? No! He'd tell himself fiercely, clenching his fists in defiance, making his resolve even stronger. It was real. More real than anything I've ever experienced. He started journaling obsessively, pouring every single detail onto the page. The radiant light, the terrifying beings, the suffocating darkness, the apocalyptic visions, and most importantly, the divine presence of Jesus. It was a torrent of raw emotions, a desperate need to capture the truth before it slipped away, to solidify the memory before it faded into the realm of dreams. And in the act of writing, of translating his experience into words, something profound shifted within him. Putting his experience into words, into a tangible form, helped him make sense of the chaos, gave him a sense of direction, a path forward. These weren't just fleeting memories. They were a powerful message, a story that desperately needed to be told, a warning that needed to be heard. But telling that story, sharing that message, well, that was a whole other battle, a challenge that would require unwavering courage and resilience. His first public attempt to share his story took place at a small community gathering, a local event where familiar faces congregated. He stood there, heart hammering in his chest like a frantic drummer, his voice shaky with a mixture of nerves and conviction, describing his extraordinary journey to the other side, the overwhelming, all-encompassing love he had felt, the terrifying visions of the future that had been seared into his memory. He had hoped to inspire, to awaken a sense of urgency, but the reactions were a mixed bag, a spectrum of emotions and opinions. Some were visibly moved, nodding along in silent agreement, wiping away tears of empathy and understanding. Others just stared at him with a healthy dose of skepticism, their expressions clearly questioning his sanity, their eyes betraying their doubts. Afterwards, a man approached him, a kind-faced pastor from a local church, his demeanor radiating warmth and compassion. He told Chase that his story reminded him of the Bible, of divine encounters and miraculous experiences throughout history. "What you've experienced is incredibly powerful," the pastor said, his voice gentle and reassuring. "But not everyone is ready to hear it, to embrace such a profound truth. Don't let the doubters discourage you. Don't let their skepticism extinguish your flame. Focus on those who are willing to listen, those whose hearts are open to your message." Those words were like a soothing balm to Chase's wounded soul, a much-needed encouragement in the face of doubt. He started speaking more frequently, mostly at small informal gatherings where the atmosphere was more intimate and receptive. And each time he shared his story, he would see those faces, the ones who were genuinely touched by his message, their eyes reflecting a newfound understanding. They would come up to him afterwards, thanking him profusely, sharing their own deeply buried fears and personal struggles. It was in those precious moments that Chase remembered why he was sent back: to awaken hearts, to spark positive change, one person at a time. Of course, it wasn't all sunshine and roses, a smooth path paved with acceptance and understanding. Chase faced his fair share of criticism, encountering those who vehemently opposed his message. People called him a fraud, a delusional attention seeker, and hurled a few colorful names he would rather forget. Some even brought up his military background, suggesting he was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, his visions merely a manifestation of a troubled mind. Every accusation was like a punch to the gut, a painful blow to his credibility and integrity, but Chase refused to let them derail him, to silence his voice. He knew, with unwavering certainty, what he had seen, what he had felt, and this mission was too damn important to abandon, too vital to ignore. As time went on, Chase noticed a gradual but profound change within himself. The things that used to occupy his time and attention, mindless television, idle gossip, trivial pursuits, suddenly seemed so utterly insignificant, so meaningless in the grand scheme of things. He felt this growing, undeniable urge to do something meaningful with his life, to serve others, to make a positive impact on the world, to live a life that reflected the divine light he had encountered. He started volunteering at homeless shelters, offering a helping hand and a compassionate ear to those in need. He began mentoring troubled teens, guiding them towards a better path, offering support and encouragement. He dedicated himself to making a difference in his little corner of the world, however small it might seem. It felt insignificant compared to the monumental task ahead, but he held on to the unwavering belief that even the smallest acts of kindness could have a ripple effect, spreading outwards and creating positive change. He also found himself increasingly drawn to prayer and quiet reflection. Before his near-death experience, he wasn't exactly a religious man, but now he felt this deep, undeniable connection to something infinitely bigger than himself, a higher power that he couldn't quite explain or fully comprehend. He prayed for guidance, for strength to face the challenges ahead, for the wisdom to know how to effectively fulfill his mission. And even when he felt lost and uncertain, he trusted that he was being divinely guided, that his path was unfolding as it should. One night, amidst a restless sleep, he had a vivid, unforgettable dream. He was standing in a desolate post-apocalyptic wasteland, fire and ruin stretching as far as the eye could see. He instantly recognized it from the terrifying visions Jesus had shown him. But this time, there was something profoundly different. Amidst the overwhelming destruction and despair, he saw these tiny lights flickering in the distance, beacons of hope in the encroaching darkness. As he drew closer, he realized they were people, each holding a small flickering flame. The flames were weak, barely visible against the overwhelming darkness, but together they were steadily pushing back the shadows, their collective light illuminating the path towards a better future. When Chase woke up, the meaning of the dream was crystal clear. His mission wasn't about single-handedly saving the world, a task far beyond the capabilities of any one individual. It was about igniting those small flames of hope, love, and faith in others, empowering them to become beacons of light themselves. Each person he reached, each heart he touched, would carry that light forward, spreading it further and wider than he could ever imagine. The darkness wouldn't be defeated overnight. It would be a gradual and arduous process, but through countless small acts of light, the tide could slowly turn. Hope could prevail. Fueled by this newfound understanding, this profound realization of his purpose, Chase doubled down on his efforts. He started sharing his story online, leveraging the power of the internet to reach a global audience. Videos of his heartfelt testimony went viral, spreading his message far and wide. And while the skeptics continued to scoff and dismiss his claims, there were countless others who were deeply moved by his words, their hearts resonating with his message of hope and transformation. Messages poured in from all corners of the world, some sharing their own near-death experiences, others thanking him profusely for giving them hope in a world that often felt shrouded in darkness and despair. Chase read every single message, drawing strength and inspiration from the connections he was making, the lives he was touching. But those haunting visions of destruction, those glimpses of a bleak future, they never completely faded from his memory. He couldn't forget the dire warnings, the precarious path humanity was on, teetering on the brink of self-destruction. He knew he couldn't force people to change, to embrace the light, but he also couldn't bear to stay silent, to stand idly by while the world hurtled towards disaster. He spoke passionately about the urgent need for love, compassion, and unity, urging people to look beyond their differences, to transcend their petty squabbles, and work together for the greater good of humanity. "We're running out of time," he'd say, his voice filled with urgency, echoing the words that were permanently seared into his soul. "We can't afford to wait for someone else to save us, to magically fix our problems. It starts with each of us, with every conscious choice we make, every act of kindness we offer, every spark of light we ignite in the world." Years passed, seasons changed, and Chase continued his tireless mission, never losing sight of the divine light that had brought him back from the abyss, that had given him a second chance at life. He knew he wouldn't witness the full impact of his efforts in his lifetime, that the seeds he planted might not fully blossom until long after he was gone. But that was okay. He had been given a second chance, a chance to live a life filled with purpose, to dedicate himself to serving others, to share the profound truth he had been entrusted with. Chase's extraordinary journey wasn't about achieving fame or fortune, or becoming some kind of messianic savior. It was about unwavering faith, relentless resilience, and an unshakable belief that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, light would ultimately prevail. His story wasn't just a dire warning. It was a powerful call to action, a heartfelt reminder that every single person, no matter how ordinary they might seem, has the inherent power to make a difference, to contribute to a better future. And as long as he had breath in his body, as long as his heart continued to beat, Chase would keep carrying that light forward, illuminating the path for others, one step at a time. But Chase was not the only one who had met Jesus. Throughout history, tons of people have claimed to have met the big guy himself, to have felt his presence in ways that just don't make sense logically. These encounters, usually happening when someone's going through a really tough time or searching for something more in life, totally change them. It's like they get a new operating system, and they can't help but tell everyone about the upgrade. Take St. Paul, for instance. This dude was basically public enemy number one for early Christians. He was all about hunting them down and throwing them in jail. But then, wham! On his way to Damascus, a blinding light knocks him off his high horse, and he hears Jesus talking to him. Talk about a reality check. This experience flipped a switch in him. He went from Christian hunter to super fan, spreading the word about Jesus like wildfire. He became a VIP in the early church, and his story still blows people's minds today. It just goes to show how powerful running into Jesus can be. Then there's St. Augustine, this brainy philosopher guy back in the 4th century. In his book Confessions, he spills the tea about his own messy journey to faith. He was restless, always looking for answers in the wrong places, partying, philosophy, you name it. He was like the poster child for a lost soul. But then, boom, he has this spiritual awakening, guided by God's voice and a wise teacher named St. Ambrose. He finally finds peace and becomes a Christian. His story is like a roadmap for anyone who's ever felt lost and confused, searching for something real. Fast forward to modern times, and you've got Colton Burpo. This kid had surgery when he was just 4 years old. And get this, he says he went to heaven and hung out with Jesus. His book, Heaven is for Real, is packed with crazy details about heaven, Jesus, and even dead relatives he met up there. It became a bestseller, and people couldn't get enough of it. Sure, some folks rolled their eyes, but many found comfort in his story, believing it was proof of a happy afterlife. And then there's Eben Alexander, a brain surgeon, a guy who knows all about the human mind. He had a near-death experience while in a coma, and says he traveled to another dimension, a place filled with love and light. His story, proof of heaven, is wild, especially coming from a scientist. It makes you question everything you thought you knew about consciousness and what happens after we die. What's crazy is how these stories, from different times and places, all have similar vibes. People who say they've met Jesus describe feeling flooded with love, peace, and understanding. They feel connected to something massive, something way bigger than themselves, and it gives them a sense of purpose that goes beyond everyday life. These encounters often turn them into faith warriors, eager to help others and spread a message of hope. The Bible is full of these kinds of stories too. Think about Moses and the burning bush, or Elijah hearing God's whisper. These moments remind us that God is involved in the world and wants to connect with us. Other religions have similar stories. The Quran talks about Prophet Muhammad's trip to heaven. In Hinduism, the Bhagavad Gita tells the story of Arjuna meeting Krishna, a god in human form. These stories, from all over the world, suggest that connecting with the divine is possible. Now, you might be thinking, come on, are these stories for real? Maybe they're just hallucinations or wishful thinking. Scientists might try to explain them away as brain glitches or psychological stuff. But the people who have had these experiences insist it's something much deeper, something science can't fully grasp. They talk about a reality beyond our senses, a place where love and connection are the ultimate truth. Whether you're a believer or a skeptic, you gotta admit these stories are powerful. They remind us that we're not alone, that there's something bigger than us out there, and that even when things suck, there's always hope. They give us a glimpse into the great mysteries of life and death, and the possibility of something truly amazing waiting for us on the other side. So, what do you think? Is Chase's experience a glimpse of something real, or just a trick of the mind? Do you believe there's a message waiting for us beyond this life? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, stay curious.